Compared to some televangelists, Joel Osteen has kept himself relatively free of scandals, but he's far from squeaky clean. Osteen has plenty of critics who are quick to point out that the powerful preacher man is not without his controversies. Let's look at the troubled history of Joel Osteen. It's easy to assume that condemning neo-Nazis would be the easiest possible thing for a person to do, especially when said person is a prominent religious leader who very pointedly preaches a message of hope and love. However, reality is often strange and disappointing. In August 2017, a white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, Virginia turned into a terrifying event when brawls erupted between the far-right marchers and the counter-protesters. The situation ended in tragedy when a neo-Nazi drove a car into a crowd of people opposing them, killing one person and injuring 19 others. Several more were injured in the various clashes during the event. According to the Christian Post, many religious leaders were quick to condemn the white supremacist actions. Joel Osteen, on the other hand, chose a different route. He initially remained quiet, but once this approach started drawing criticism, he explained his views in a Facebook post that, to many, was no better than his initial silence. One of the biggest challenges we all face is getting along with people because everyone is different. We have different personalities, different temperaments. He then went on to explain his views that someone doesn't have to engage when they see another person doing something wrong. Unsurprisingly, Osteen's pacifist rhetoric didn't go over too well, as many people reportedly felt that he was downplaying violent racism and outright murder, while implying that pro-Nazi sentiments are just as valid and acceptable as anything else. In late August 2017, the Houston area was thoroughly wrecked by Hurricane Harvey. As World Vision reported, the disaster directly and indirectly killed an estimated 103 people, flooded a third of the USA's fourth largest city, and caused roughly $125 billion in damage. It was a difficult time for the area, and like any good religious leader, Joel Osteen had some words of wisdom and solace to offer, with the preacher taking to Twitter to write, "Jesus promises us peace that passes understanding. That's peace when it doesn't make sense." There was just one minor problem. As the New York Post points out, Osteen had plenty more to give than just social media platitudes. Namely, the Lakewood Church, a 16,800-seat arena-turned megachurch that was very near to downtown Houston, and which could easily be used to house a significant portion of the many Houstonians in need of a temporary shelter. Several people immediately pointed out that Osteen's giant facility hadn't opened its doors to the many people in need, despite the fact that it appeared to be undamaged by the flood. As entertainment publicist Danny Deraney put it on Twitter, "Open your church. You have taken so much money away from your people to live like a king. It's the least you could do." Others echoed the sentiment, and Osteen ultimately was pressured into opening the Lakewood Church for the victims of Hurricane Harvey. But as CNN reports, the whole thing was a huge PR nightmare. Soon after people called him out for not immediately offering sanctuary in his house of worship, Osteen tweeted, "Victoria and I care deeply about our fellow Houstonians. Lakewood's doors are open and we are receiving anyone who needs shelter." Unfortunately, the Lakewood Church had already given a torrent of reasons for keeping its doors closed. They'd said that the building was severely flooded and inaccessible, and that they weren't really closed, they were just waiting until other shelters had reached their capacity. While the comments were backed up by photos that showed floodwater in parts of the facility, the situation didn't exactly make Osteen look good.
We were waiting for the right time. Really, Lakewood is always open. We just didn't necessarily have staff here the night that it flooded out here.
A columnist on CNN blasted the televangelists' excuses, and sites like The Inquisitor and TMZ openly questioned the veracity of the church's flooding claims. Joel Osteen himself quite naturally took the brunt of the bad PR storm, but soon addressed the situation. He explained that apart from safety concerns, the city hadn't asked the church to become a shelter, so they didn't immediately have the resources to start helping scores of people. Showing just how compassionate he is, though, in his first service after the disaster, he also advised the victims of the hurricane to forget what he called their, quote, "poor old me" mentality. As CBS News reports, Joel Osteen's Lakewood Church in Houston is comfortably the biggest megachurch in America, with an estimated 43,500 weekly visitors as of 2018. Knowing this, it's easy to assume that Osteen's religious message must be particularly strong and comforting. According to the Lakewood Church website, Joel Osteen's massive church indeed bases its beliefs on the central tenet that the Bible is from God and entirely without error. However, according to the Houston Chronicle, Osteen doesn't actually refer to the fundamental matters of religion all that much. His self-admitted style is that of an encourager, and he rarely dwells on Christianity's many mysteries or doctrines.
I am young, I am beautiful, I am attractive. Remember, what follows the I am is going to come looking for you.
Instead, he pitches a creed that tells people to ignore the bad things in life and to focus on the good. As he stated in one of his sermons, God wouldn't have allowed it if it was going to keep you from your destiny. Shake off a victim mentality and have a victor mentality. This motivational speaker manner doesn't sit too well with some of Osteen's critics. Pete Evans, a private investigator specializing in the misconduct of churches and televangelists, has a pretty clear opinion of the substance behind the Lakewood church pastor's message, saying, "He's a pitchman, selling congeniality and empty promises in the name of God. All you get is an empty box of hope for a better life someday." Since he's a televangelist at the head of a sizable megachurch, it's easy to assume that Joel Osteen has a fairly glorious bank account at his disposal. And you'd be right. Wealth estimation site Celebrity Net Worth guesstimates Osteen's net worth at no less than $100 million, while the Financial Times goes with a rather more conservative $60 million. It's still an immeasurable pile of dough by almost any standard, especially that of a man of God.
So do you make any apologies for your grand piano?
I really don't, Oprah. We just feel like this is God's blessings.
As the Houston Chronicle reports, Osteen's wealth has drawn criticism from scholars and watchdog groups. Carl Truman, professor of church history at the Westminster Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania and a pastor himself, doesn't hide his opinion that Osteen's pockets seem to be a little on the deep side for a preacher. As Truman says, "There's always the question of how much money is too much for a pastor to earn. When you're looking at his lavish private lifestyle, I'd say that's too much." Osteen's lifestyle indeed seems luxurious, judging by the way he and his wife Victoria reportedly live in a 17,000 square foot mansion with a value of $10.7 to $12 million. To be fair, while some scholars think he's way out of line with his personal possessions, there's no evidence that he's misappropriating church funds. In fact, Pete Harris, private investigator and 20-year veteran of church misconduct investigations, specifically notes that Osteen doesn't appear to break any laws. The bulk of Joel Osteen's personal income comes from his books, and as the Houston Chronicle reports, he is a highly talented marketing machine. When he's on his home turf at the Lakewood Church, he doesn't solicit donations or promote his books all that much. However, he has a traveling sermon event called the Night of Hope, and when he takes it on the road, the gloves come off. The admission fee is $15 per person, but that's just the beginning. Tables are stacked with books and merchandise that ranges from clothes and tote bags to journals and audio tapes. Special prizes are available to those who pledge enough money, and donation requests and advertisements for Osteen-themed radio channels, social media, and even apps are everywhere. Osteen often has book signing events in the same cities where the Night of Hope takes place, and though the two events aren't marketed together, his involvement in one tends to drum up hype for the other, and there's plenty of follower overlap. The Night of Hope events themselves aren't necessarily huge moneymakers, as they reportedly turned a loss in 2017. However, Blunt says this is covered from the church's budget, which comes largely from donations, and Osteen still gets a huge amount of exposure, which translates to personal benefit through book sales. This is no small backwoods business either. As of 2018, Osteen has preached to a sold-out Madison Square Garden no less than 7 times. In recent years, any famous person with a public affinity for religion has faced a considerable risk of running into Kanye West, a man who's been so very much into religion lately. He's also fond of religious events he calls his Sunday services, and as the Los Angeles Times reports, in November 2019, he took the stage at Joel Osteen's Lakewood Church in this capacity. What happened for the next 20 minutes was markedly different from your average sermon. West, who CNN notes has battled mental health issues in the past, acted as Osteen's special guest. Playing the part of an interviewer, Osteen asked West questions about his work, youth, and relationship with the divine. The artist answered like only Kanye West can, in a stream of consciousness style that seemed to cast West himself in a borderline prophetic role, waging war against the devil and acting as God's mouthpiece. He said that the devil has stolen all the good musical artists, but fortunately, the greatest artist that God has ever created is now working for him. And because things weren't peculiar enough, he then started claiming that strip clubs promote sex trafficking and that Christians are not treated well by the society at large. Or Kanye. Joel Osteen's detractors have criticized him for preaching the prosperity gospel, which refers to a school of preaching that focuses heavily on the notion that if you're devout enough, God will reward you with wealth and health.
If I want to believe God for a $65 million plane, you cannot stop me. You cannot stop me from dreaming.
The prosperity gospel was made infamous by equally infamous televangelists like Tammy Faye and Jim Bakker, and many see it as a cynical way to lure in weak and poor supporters with promises of faith-delivered riches.
Who told you you can't accomplish your dreams?
It doesn't help that tithing, which is giving a part of your income to the church on a regular basis, is often involved. According to the Financial Times, several of Lakewood Church's devout members do this. Osteen's website has stated that, as children of God, we are overcomers and more than conquerors, and God intends for each of us to experience the abundant life He has in store for us. Some might indeed think this sounds like classic prosperity gospeling. Nonetheless, Osteen is quick to distance himself from the sort of televangelists who ask for handouts. In a 2012 interview with Oprah Winfrey, he said,
I'm not asking them for money on television. I'm not trying to, don't try to be slick. I try to be sincere and all that. Just try to be who we are.
Joel Osteen is a convincing, charismatic presence whose public persona is smiling, suave, and immaculately dressed. It's quite difficult to imagine the pastor committing any sort of social blunder. Yet, as the Christian Post reports, some of his fans felt that's exactly what happened in 2017 when his son Jonathan graduated from the University of Texas. The University of Texas at Austin is famous for its Longhorns football team, which in turn is famous for the Hook 'em horns. This traditional Longhorn hand signal is common at the university, but it also bears a considerable resemblance to the devil horns gesture, as popularized by legendary metal vocalist Ronnie James Dio. And so it came to be that 2 generations of Osteens posed for a picture while flashing the Hook 'em horns. As CBS Austin reported, when the televangelist posted the image on Twitter, people immediately started accusing him of using the devil sign, with some suggesting that he should have used a more befitting sign, such as plain old thumbs up. Ironically enough, the Austin American-Statesman notes that a thumbs up at the University of Texas would probably have gone down a lot worse than the horn sign, seeing as it's the sign of the Texas A&M University, a traditional rival of the Longhorns. Fortunately for Osteen, this particular faux pas has so far failed to topple the Lakewood Church. When your organization is large enough, there's always the chance that someone working there gets involved in some problematic business, and when you're the face of the organization, it's suddenly very much your problem. According to Click 2 Houston, this was the case for Joel Osteen in the Lakewood Church, when the pastor found himself attached to an unfortunate lawsuit by a family who claimed that their 18-month-old daughter was injured during a church service in May 2014. According to the lawsuit, the family was sitting on the church pew before, as the lawsuit stated,
when an usher grabbed the child's safety seat she was in and threw the seat off the pew, the child landing face first on the floor.
The fall was said to have injured the girl rather seriously, while the family said the incident traumatized them so badly that they actually ended up leaving Texas. Since the church representative wasn't named, Osteen was the main person the lawsuit mentioned by name. The Lakewood Church said there were no witnesses to back up the family's story and that they considered the whole thing to be a lie. Nevertheless, Radar Online reports that in 2016, the church ended up settling the case for $15,000. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite televangelists are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.